What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is Dog Talk with your host, Holden. Glad to have you guys here today as we get prepared for yet again another episode. Big game this weekend, big game against Mississippi State that we just got over with. I'm in a pretty good mood coming into this one, which is always a good thing. Always excited to be in a good mood when we're about to record a show because generally it just makes for a better show. I have to really be careful of this wire because I have in the past accidentally bumped that wire right there, and every single bit of the audio that I recorded, gone. Let me just not put that there. Just not going to put that there. If you guys are listening on podcast, make sure you go over and check out the YouTube channel. I put up a few different visual kind of things like that to try to make the YouTube channel a little bit more fun. So at least you've got some stuff to look at, and you get to look at me. And I mean, that's not much to look at. But anyways, I digress. Let's get to the show. Again, in a good mood today. I've started to get some of the Christmas stuff going here because Christmas is right around the corner. And for you guys that are listening and watching, and you say, hey, we got to get through Thanksgiving, listen, Thanksgiving is a day, Christmas is a season. I'm just saying. But anyways, again, off track, off the rails, and we haven't even got started. So let's get to it. Again, guys, I really appreciate you guys listening. If you guys want to follow us on Twitter, make sure you do that as well, at DogTalk20. We're getting to it. Dogs taking care of business against some other dogs over in Mississippi. The Mississippi State Dogs is what we had to take care of, and we did that in big fashion. We're going to get to it. We're going to talk about it. There's some other games around the country that happen too. The SEC East, the SEC West, those have been decided. Congratulations out to the Georgia Bulldogs, SEC East champions, as you guys see on the screen there. We're going to face off against LSU coming up December 3rd for the SEC championship game. I put a little quote up there. You probably can't see it very well. But it says, we don't want just the East. We want the entire SEC. So, that's the goal. That's the goal right now. Other than ending out this season against Kentucky, who we're going to talk about in a minute, against Georgia Tech. Announced it earlier today. Georgia, defending national champions. No night game. No night game at home for us. It's okay. That's okay. We're just going to take care of business as we continue to roll through the rest of this season. I'm all right with that. I'm all right with it. I'm not going to say that the season ticket holders are going to necessarily be okay with that. You might want to put in a couple of night games for the Dogs next year. That'd be a good idea in my book. But, hey, again, I tweeted this out last week. I think I'm starting to agree with Kirby. I kind of like the old 3:30 kick. 3:30 kick's not too bad. That's what we got this week coming up against Kentucky. We'll preview that later on in the week, but that is what it is. Let's kind of get to some of this big stuff that we've got from this Mississippi State game. What a football game. What a football game. Really kind of a slow start, kind of a slow, sluggish start. But Georgia fans, man, they showed up in this game. I mean, half of the stadium looked like it was red and black for Georgia. And it's like the Mississippi State fans blacked out the crowd, and the players wore just normal, maroon jerseys. I don't remember what color jersey were we wearing. Were we wearing white and they wore maroon? Or were we wearing red and they wore white? Fairly certain we were wearing white and they wore maroon. But anyways, I digress on that too. Look, we're getting sidetracked all day. We're in a good mood, but we're going to get through this thing. Like I said, kind of a slow start. Georgia getting off to that one touchdown lead at the end of the first quarter. But things did kind of pick up from there. Things did start to look a lot better in this football game as we moved. Evidently, all of my stats and everything like that are just going to disappear off the page for me, which helps me none. But I'll see if I can get it pulled up on my phone, and that'll make it a little bit quicker for us. In the meantime, I normally do this at the end of the show, and I'm going to do it now while we're off the rails. Anyways, you guys, if you want to leave a 5-star review for the podcast, I greatly appreciate it. All that does is get more exposure to the show. The more 5 stars that there are out there, it just brings, I guess, the rankings, or it just kind of makes it where the show is more visible to more people. And again, that's just kind of the exposure part of it. Leave a 5-star review. And like I said, if you guys leave a 5-star review, Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you can do that, I will make sure to read it on the show upcoming by the end of this season for sure. If you guys would put that on there, I would greatly appreciate it. If you want to support the show, and that just means you click the link in the description of the podcast, even on YouTube, wherever you guys listen. If you guys are watching on YouTube, it's always at the bottom of the description. It says it's a support link. If you want to support the show, it gives you a few different options that you can donate to the show. And again, that just kind of helps keep the show going. That's all there is to it. I hadn't really pushed for many ads. I mean, there's one at the start of the show every week, and that's just the normal hosting ad, so nothing major to that. But I try to keep it fairly open so that way we can just kind of run through the show and enjoy it without a bunch of disruptions in the middle of it. Anyway, back to it as I start to get it here. Brock Bowers starting things off. Actually ends up being a really quiet night for Brock Bowers, but he starts it off, first touchdown of the night for the Dawgs. 2-yard touchdown pass from Stetson to him. Then we kick a field goal, going up 10 to nothing. They kick a field goal, make it 10-3. We go up 17-3, and at this point, it's like, all right, we're cruising. Start to get late there in the fourth quarter, or late right before the half, and they kick a field goal with under a minute left, and I was like, okay, let's see, are we going to see the Kirby Smart conservative guy who comes out and kneels it when we take this thing to the half as a 17-6 lead, or is this going to be the Kirby Smart who comes out aggressive and he wants to drive the football down the field and try to score within a minute? And we kind of got a mixture of it where we ran the ball, then we threw it, weren't really effective at anything. Next thing you know, it was fourth down, and there was still a little bit of time on the clock. We end up punting it, and they run it all the way back. First special teams blunder for Georgia's kicking team, at least, of the season. They run it back, and they make it a 17-12 game after they try to go for two there. Just before the half, that was about 3 seconds left. We get the kickoff, and obviously we end the half there. Come out on fire. This is where Georgia really started to pick it up and take off from there. Come out on fire. Lab McConkey end around for 70 yards, making it 24-12. Another touchdown to, yet again, Lab McConkey, 17-yard pass, making it 31-12. And then they do end up scoring just a little bit after that, making it 31-19. They would not score anymore. Darnell Washington with the touchdown. Kendall Milton with a big run late in the fourth quarter to make that game 45-19 to end up sealing the deal on it. Good football game, like I said, overall. Was very proud of us. Right there before the half, you get that little bit of a scare, I guess you'd say, where you're kind of starting to wonder, okay, are these Dogs going to pull away, or is this going to be a Missouri game of earlier in the season? Luckily, it wasn't that. Again, Georgia came out on fire in the second half of this, starting in the third quarter. Whatever kind of a speech, whatever kind of a lecture that Kirby gives at halftime, I'd like to have that in my life, because if it's going to improve things the way that it does there, I'm okay with that. I told you guys coming into this game in the past couple of weeks, this is something I've been saying. Elite teams that should be fighting and playing for conference championships, teams that should be playing for national championships, teams that are in the top 4 at the end of this season that should be playing for national championship hopes in the college football playoff should not struggle in the end with teams. There should not be a game where you're only up by a field goal, where you're only up by 1 or 2. And I said this, and again, I could eat crow on this as this season comes to an end, but you should really start to pull away. Ohio State did that this week, where they could have just laid down. Last week, that didn't happen. Michigan, they took care of business. Georgia didn't look very great at the half, took care of business in the end. Took care of business. TCU, fighting back and forth with Texas there. In the end, TCU does end up pulling away with that. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But teams that should be in the conversation at the end of this season should be teams that are pulling away, not struggling. Again, we'll talk about some of these other teams in a minute. But Georgia did that. I've got the keys to the game that I'll get pulled up for us here real quick that we can run through that I do want to talk about. Offensively, did we get any turnover? We don't want turnovers. We want to start fast, and we want to run the ball. This is what we look like. Third down efficiency, which isn't one of the keys this week. We were 6 for 13, 1 for 1, but total yards 468. Running the ball, how did we do? 179 yards. 179 yards. We started fast. Again, we were off to a 17-3 lead. Well, I say started fast. Actually, like I said at the start of this thing, it's actually a little slower. We're only getting a touchdown in the first quarter. We do pull away a little bit there in the second quarter right before the half, obviously. They make a big play to come back and make it a really tight football game before the half. But we ran the ball, didn't really start fast, and we did have turnovers in this one. Unfortunately, both of those do come from Stetson. Stetson on the night, not too shabby. 25 for 37, 289 yards, right at 300 yards, averaging almost 8 yards. Had 3 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions. One of which was a little bit of a block pass that got intercepted. And yeah, you can still kind of put that against Stetson. The other one, it got batted down at the line and literally fell in the guy's lap as the lineman literally smacks the ball and it just falls into his lap. I don't know how else to say it other than Just a wild play. Normally, a ball that's getting hit like that's going on the ground, and that's just the end of the play. But somehow falls right into his hands, and Stetson ends up with 2 interceptions on the night. So didn't end up with that. So couple of slashes through those. I didn't do my big X's and check marks this week, but didn't really cover the keys that we wanted to offensively in this one as far as no turnovers and starting fast. Luckily, we ended fast. That was a good thing. We did run the ball, did that effectively. Looking at defense, did we affect their quarterback? Stop the run game, which they ended up not really running the football in this game. They only ran the ball, 15 times, and that's 47 yards. 47 yards. So stopping the run, check, technically. Stopping the secondary. Will Rogers, 29 for 51, had to throw the football 51 times in this game. 51 times. Did have one touchdown and does end up with about 261 yards on the night. So not too terrible. Not too terrible. As far as it goes, when it comes to affecting the quarterback in this one, we did have a couple of tackles for loss. Biggest thing in this one was only one sack. Only one sack. That does come from Jalen Carter pushing through the line. So we affected him a little bit. We did have some hurries in this game as well, so we were getting in his face a little bit. But there were times where Will Rogers had time back in the pocket. But our secondary, that's where it comes to the other strong secondary. Secondary was elite. They were elite in this game. They didn't get beat deep. There were only a couple of passes where they did actually have a couple of chunk plays in this one. One for 36, another for 47, another for 24. So they had a few plays that were fairly big passing the ball in this game. But in the end, the secondary still looked pretty good. Strong secondary, playing elite, doing what you have to do. So defensively, looked pretty good. I'd give a check mark to pretty much all three of those things. Again, they didn't really throw the football for a lot in this one. Total yards, again, Georgia 468 to 308 from Mississippi State. We threw it 289. They threw it 261. We have the 2 interceptions. We ran the ball 179 yards. They did for 47. The number I do not like is 6 penalties for us. A little undisciplined in this game. 6 penalties, 66 yards. Don't like those 3 sixes next to each other. They were 5 penalties for 41 yards. And there were some controversial calls. We'll talk about that for just a minute. We're not going to harp on it too much. But there were a couple of plays in this game that really, some of it might have could have gone either way. But there were a couple that were not good in this game. And unfortunately, a couple of these calls went Georgia's way, one of which was stop forward progress, where Mississippi State pulled the ball. I think at the time was Dejon Edwards, pulled the ball out of his hands. And honestly, I'm going to be honest with you, that's Mississippi State's ball. And they called stopping of forward progression, that the play was dead. I'm not buying it. I'm a Georgia fan. I am. And I'm not buying that was not supposed to be Mississippi State's ball. It is what it is. That's just where I'm kind of going to leave that. Not the greatest officiating in this game. There were a couple of calls that really went against Georgia, too, that I did not see and didn't understand why we're seeing a flag. A couple of these pass interference, but the same thing could be said on the other side. It's kind of strange. It was a blend of a couple of bad calls against Mississippi State that went Georgia's favor, and then they kind of gave those calls back to them in some situations that really were bad calls against Georgia, but I kind of understood because of some of the calls they had against Mississippi State. And quite frankly, like that there with the strip should have been their ball. So they kind of gave them a couple of calls, and I was like, all right, that's enough. That's enough. We've given them to give it back. But then it was like there were bad calls for them and bad calls for us. It's kind of both ways. And then there were good calls. There were the normal goods, but just a mix of interesting officiating. Interesting officiating is kind of how I'll put it in this game as far as how it felt. But overall, didn't feel too bad. Never really had much of a concern. Even when they ran the punt back right before the half, I kind of sat back and I was like, yeah, I don't know. I just don't feel like it's. I wasn't really feeling nervous about it. Kind of the same way when we played Tennessee. I didn't have much nerves going into it. I was just more or less anticipating and excited for that game to come on and be played. Not really nervous, and kind of same thing at this. Again, at one point this game's 17-12, something like that. They try to go for 2 to make it a field goal game, and it doesn't happen. But never in my mind was I like, this doesn't feel like a win here. No. The entire game felt like Georgia was going to take over. And the second half, they did that. They pulled away pretty easily, especially by the time we got into the fourth quarter. a couple of touchdowns late. And that is one thing I do want to credit out to Georgia, too. Even though they start, 17 points in the first half of this game, put up 24 in the second half. 28 in the second half. So got 4 touchdowns on the second half, 2 for the third and 2 for the fourth quarter, which I'm glad to see. I'm glad to still see us continue to score late. You take that Tennessee game, we don't really score much in the second half. Granted, it's wet. It's a little bit different. This was a very cold football game that we played in Starkville as well. So weather, you can say, plays a factor, but regardless, it plays a factor for both teams and against both teams. It's not like one team is playing in warm weather and then the other team has to get on the field and play in cold weather. It's not like one team is playing with a wet ball when it's raining and the other team's not. You know what I mean? Both teams that are on the field are dealing with the same exact environment as the team across from them. So you just got to get out there and play the football game. So I was glad to see Georgia play football the way that we did in the second half especially. Would like to see some of that first half stuff cleaned up, and I don't doubt that's coming. A good game coming up. We're headed to Lexington this weekend. I told you guys earlier in the season, hey, this second half is the back half of the season after the bye. It's pretty loaded, and this is going to be the test for Georgia to see if we can get through that. You got Florida in a neutral site. We took care of business. Tennessee at home took care of business there. Mississippi State on the road took care of business. Now we got to go to Lexington before we get to play home for senior night against Tech to round out the season. Only 2 weeks left. We head to Lexington. I don't really have nearly the nerves that I had. I say nerves. Really don't have the concern or question about heading to Lexington after what we saw this past week. Vandy heading to Kentucky. It's kind of a good time to rotate over to, some of those other games around the country, which we're going to get to. But I think the dog of the day that I did want to get to, you got to go with Ladd. Ladd McConkey had himself a night. But also, I kind of want to, as an honorable mention, so to speak, I want to also put in there Kearis Jackson. Because Kearis Jackson, he really had a great game. Great football game in this one. Kearis ends up second on receiving at 69 yards. Didn't get a touchdown. Ladd leads the receiving category 71 yards, so only a couple of yards difference. He did obviously have that touchdown earlier in this one as well. Or excuse me, it was actually later in this one too. Darnell Washington 60, and like I said, it wasn't a huge game for Brock Bowers. He does get a touchdown, but only 41 yards. Marcus Rosemary at 29. DeJohn Edwards coming in there as well. Ladd McConkey also left. This is kind of the wild thing. He led receiving category and rushing category. One rush for 70 yards. That was that end-around touchdown. Kendall Milton getting back in the action here. Had a touchdown on the night. That 34-yard run ends at second. Tied for second technically with Kenny Mack at 41 yards. Stetson had 14. And Stetson, break your ankles, Bennett. My goodness. It is fun to watch this dude run the football the way that he has this season. Last season, there were a lot of times he'd take off running. I'm like, first of all, don't get hurt. Don't get hurt. Second of all, please don't drop this football. And in the national championship game, when he took off running and fumbles it and luckily fell right on it, I was like, oh, that's what I always feared. And I still kind of fear that, but not as much because he's been much more protective of the football this season. And I say that I think he may have. Well, he didn't really have a fumble. It was kind of a drop snap on the goal line that he fell right on top of. But Stetson, he's looked much better. Again, 14 yards, but I mean the dude can break an ankle at the goal line, which is an exciting thing to see as Stetson just continues to progress. He's still got things to learn. I think there were still some moments where he tried to play hero in this game. He had some checkdowns that he could have thrown to that he didn't. I don't know if he just didn't look that way, missed it, if he was trying to force a ball here. Again, his 2 interceptions kind of in the air, one literally in the air that was batted up and picked off by the other team. But there were a couple of other ones that he could have had as well. Now, granted, we had 2 that literally hit our guys right in the hands that we dropped as well. We didn't get turnovers. We're not winning the turnover margin again in this football game, and on the season, really, it's kind of gone completely downhill as far as that goes. But there were a couple other plays where Stetson really made bad reads, and I mean threw it to a guy, and I don't know how it wasn't intercepted on a couple other passes. So still things to clean up, but I mean when you go to Starkville, a loud environment, SEC play like Kirby tells you every week, and you win the game, 26 points. I mean 45-19. That's a pretty good football game to be able to do that on the road at night, no less than somebody else's crowd. Granted, again, I would probably put that at like a 75-25 75% Mississippi State fans. I think at least 25% of that stadium was full of Georgia fans. Somebody even posted a picture that like almost the entire east side bottom part of their stadium was filled with Georgia fans. So it may have even been more than that. It could have been more like 60-40 Mississippi State way. But Dogs travel. These Dog fans, I tell you what, you guys travel, which is awesome to see. And we'll see if that can happen again going to Kentucky next week, which I've got a feeling is going to happen because, again, after the way they look this week, I wouldn't be going to a football game this week. Basketball season started. I mean, why am I going to a football game this season after losing to Vandy this past week? I mean, I'm just saying. Take it with whatever grain of salt or whatever you want to. But anyway, I digress. Dogs look good. 45-19 with the win. 10-0. SEC East champions. We're going to the SEC championship game December 3rd, 4 o'clock, headed to meet the LSU Tigers, who beat Arkansas by, what, a touchdown? They beat them by a touchdown? Let's see. Let's pull up the scoreboard here. A field goal. 13-10. Whopping 13-10 in Arkansas. Cold football game, too. 13-10 was the final in that one. I'm ready for that one. That's going to be a good one. That's going to be fun. It's on the road. Neutral field. Atlanta, Georgia. Man, I cannot believe there are only 2 weeks left in this college football season. 2 weeks. I said last week, man, there ain't but 3 weeks left in this season. I may have said 4. I was wrong. I was dead wrong. But anyway, there's 2 weeks. We got this week, we got next week, and the college football regular season is over. Just that fast. Then national championship hopes. Got to keep them alive. Still got to handle business these next 2 weeks. As long as you do that, you're in the driver's seat. As long as you do that, you're in the driver's seat. I do not think, as long as Georgia beats Kentucky and Georgia Tech, I do not think it matters what happens in the SEC championship game. I think it's a lot like last year. I really do. I think even if Georgia was to lose to LSU, I think you have no choice. But with the, not necessarily resume, but just the way Georgia has played all season, you can't leave that team out. It's the best team in the country. They're proving it. Maybe not every single week, but most weeks Georgia has proved, hey, we're the number one team in the country, whether you want to put us up there or not. And again, like I said, from this point forward, you just have to defend it. Got to defend it. That's all you can do. Let's look at some of the other games around the country real quick before we get to the weekly picks and we round this thing out. USC and Colorado played on Friday. USC took care of business. All there was to it. Indiana, Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska. Don't really care about those games. I mean, you're playing a 3-7 team. You should win. TCU, Texas, that was a big one. That's a big one. I felt like Texas would look a little bit better. I thought Quinn Ewers would do a little bit better. A lot of my hat was hung on the fact that Quinn Ewers has to have a big game for this to matter. It's at home. It's in Austin. I thought this was a great opportunity for Texas to do it. Couldn't. Had the chance late in this football game, but it didn't matter. TCU wins it by a touchdown, 17-10. I still just don't know how to feel about this team. I really don't. Part of me feels like if they get in, it's going to be like a Michigan of last year. I mean, I really do feel that way. I feel like if TCU is to get in, and I'm not trying to talk smack before we get to this point in the season, but I don't. If you've got a Georgia, an Ohio State, a Tennessee, a Michigan, I think Alabama could beat TCU. I could be wrong about that. I really could, but I'm just not buying it. I'm not buying that TCU is a top 4 team in this country. They've proven it. They've proven it week in and week out. This was a prove-it game. This is a game that I did not expect them to win. This is a game that I thought was going to determine, okay, we're going to get a shake-up in the top 4. We're going to get a shake-up in the top 5 or 6. This is where the committee really has to start drawing lines because Tennessee's right there on the outside looking in. Do you put them in? Do you not? Speaking of Tennessee, Tennessee, Missouri. This was another game that I thought was going to be pretty tight. In the third quarter, it was almost halfway through the third quarter. This is a touchdown football game. And all of a sudden, the absolute firepower that Tennessee can have in a football game, even though we didn't see that in Athens a couple of weeks ago, that happened late in the third quarter into the fourth quarter, and they put up like 3 or 4 touchdowns to pull away and beat the snot out of Missouri and Neyland. 66-24. 66-24. It's tied at 7 at the half, or at the end of the first quarter. All of a sudden, it's 28-17 at the half. Then here comes Missouri, 28-17, and I think they end up making it 24-28 there in the third quarter before, again, 3 touchdowns in the third quarter for Tennessee to a couple touchdowns and a field goal in the fourth quarter to pull way away in that game. But this TCU team, again, they proved it, but I'm just not sure this is truly a top 4 team. I'm afraid that the situation may come up where they get in and they prove to you, hey, you can't take them out of the top 4. If they keep winning and they win the Big 12, you can't take them out of the conversation. You got to put them in. We've got them up there. If we didn't want them up there, we shouldn't have ranked them that high. And they may get in and face a Georgia, a Michigan, a Tennessee, and Ohio State. A team like that who I don't think they have any business being on the football field with. I could eat crow on this. We've still got 2 weeks left of the regular season. We've got conference championships to play before we get into these college football playoff games later on in the season. We're talking about a month and a half away just about. We've got a long way before we get there, but it's just still looking at it right now, and I'm hoping another game that happened to lead into this. I'm hoping what happened in Eugene, Oregon is something that's going to happen over these next 2 to 3 weeks to iron out this top 4. What happened in Eugene, Washington, Oregon played. Number 25 Washington traveled to number 6 Oregon. I've said this every week since we beat them. We want Oregon to look good. We want them to win because, again, that just makes you look better, Georgia. That's all there is to it. They didn't. They didn't do it in this game. Their high-powered offense didn't really show up in this football game. They fall by a field goal, 37-34 at home, ending I think the longest FBS home win streak that was going on there in Oregon, 23, 26 games, something like that. But they fall to Washington, fall to them 37-34, and that all of a sudden, number 6 team in the country, one of those teams that was one loss on the outside looking in, needs to win the Pac-12 to kind of get in to solidify themselves as a team if TCU falls out. If the Michigan-Ohio State game doesn't go the way they want it, to maybe knock a team like that out and put an Oregon in there, it's gone. Playoff hopes are dashed just like that. And maybe that happens with TCU. Maybe moving forward, maybe the Big 12 conference championship game. I don't know what it's going to take. Maybe that happens. Or maybe they win and they get there and it's like, hey, they are what they are. You got to put them in. But I'll tell you this. There is still a big question that has to come, and one that I don't think is going to get answered in these last 2 weeks. Tennessee is right there. South Carolina, Vandy. Don't sleep on Vandy. But there's those 2 games right there. South Carolina maybe fights with them a little bit. I'm not going to say that Vandy won't, but I really don't think Tennessee and South Carolina, or Tennessee and Vandy, are on the same level. That offense of Tennessee is just explosive. That's all there is to it. That's all there is to it. And they have always been explosive until they ran into the buzzsaw that is Georgia football. That is the Georgia defense that is on the field this year. By the way, looking at what we look at after this past game, still the second best defense in the country, giving up 11.6 points a game. 7th offensively, up 40.6 points a game. So, still a couple of games get ironed out, but I'm hoping between all of that and conference championship games, some of this stuff gets ironed out to where it's, I hate to say it, but I kind of want it to be chalk, where it's like, it's simple. Georgia's the best team in the country. They win out. They win the SEC championship game. They're in. Okay? Ohio State, Michigan, they play. Michigan beats Ohio State. Ohio State beats Michigan. I personally think that Michigan can do it again this year. Don't know that for sure, but feel like they could. They go to a conference championship game, win it. Now you got a 1 loss. One of those 2 teams sitting right here. Probably in 4th or 5th at that point. They probably move them to 5th and move Tennessee to 4th. TCU, if they win out and win their conference championship, all of a sudden now the question has to be, if Georgia wins out and wins the SEC championship game, number 1 team. Let's just say Michigan beats Ohio State, wins the Big Ten, undefeated, number 2 team. Tennessee or TCU wins out, wins the Big 12, number 3. Then it's, all right, you got a 1-loss Tennessee sitting here who didn't play for a conference championship. Their only 1 loss is to the number 1 team in the country. They're sitting right here. Didn't play in a conference championship, didn't win it. Then you've got a 1-loss Ohio State team who didn't play for the conference championship, didn't win it, has only lost to the number 2 team in the country. At that point, do you look and say, okay, it was an overtime loss for for Ohio State to Michigan in that game they played. Really tight football game, good game. Let's put them at 4. It's not going to be a rerun of Michigan, Ohio State. At this point, it'll be Georgia and Ohio State. Or do they look at Michigan drums them and they say, oh, well, Michigan beat the snot out of Ohio State. It's not that good. Tennessee, even though they lost to Georgia, it would be a rematch, but let's see if they can do it on neutral field. I don't know. Is that the opportunity for that? There's still questions that have to be answered, and some of this may get ironed out in the next couple of weeks. Not to put out some of these other teams that are sitting there at 7 and at 8. Not to put out some of these other teams that are sitting right behind them that we're wondering, are these teams good enough to possibly slip up in this spot? I think at 6 right now, AP poll voting at least, you got LSU sitting there. If they're not 7th, I think it's 6th though. You got LSU that's sitting there. If they beat Georgia, all of a sudden everything kind of gets thrown for a whirlwind. At that point, you've got a Michigan or Ohio State, maybe 1 or 2. Georgia falls, but I don't think you take them out of the top 4. I don't think you do that. I think at that point you've got probably an Ohio. This is another big one. Let's just say Michigan wins that. All of a sudden, Michigan's number 1 team in the country. Then you got a TCU. You got to put LSU at 3rd and Georgia at 4th. Right now, I know what Tennessee fans are doing is praying. And really, I'll say this, hoping TCU wins out, hoping that the game between Ohio State and Michigan is either a blowout, so that way it opens up another spot, if Georgia was to lose national championship or SEC championship. But this is all of a sudden a situation kind of like last week, how Alabama's sitting back going, okay, we got to beat Ole Miss. But at the same time, if we beat Ole Miss, it guarantees LSU a spot in the SEC West and playing in the SEC championship game as long as they beat Arkansas. And they beat Arkansas. So then you're sitting there going, but if I lose again, it's kind of the same situation. Tennessee fans are sitting back going, okay, I don't want to root for Georgia because if they win, they win. But if they lose, I really am not going to have a spot in this seat. I don't know. I'm curious. Again, I'm hoping not to be chalk, but I'm hoping some of this works itself out to make it simple, where you look and go, yeah, this is easy. These are the top 4 teams in the country, no doubt about it. As opposed to we get to the end and it's like, you got a couple teams that are no doubters, but we all of a sudden got these other 3 teams and we only got 2 more spots. Or we got 4 teams that could go in these last 2 spots. We got to make a decision. Luckily, I ain't on that. If Georgia wins these next 2 weeks and we win the SEC championship game against LSU, it don't really matter to me, be honest with you. Because at that point, hey, we're in. Bring it on. I don't care who we're lining up against. Bring it on. I'm looking forward to that. But that was that. Long way to get around to LSU, Arkansas, 13-10. Alabama, Ole Miss. This one came down to the line too. Ole Miss had this football game in the bag. I think at one point it was like 17-7. Had the game in the bag. All of a sudden, here comes Alabama, 17-14. It wasn't until the 3rd quarter Alabama started to lead this football game. Took a lead 24 to, I think it was 24-17 at the time. Anyway, took a lead at one point in time in this game before tie ball game going into the 4th quarter. But it didn't matter. Alabama ends up kicking a couple field goals there in the 4th quarter to put it away. Ended up winning 30-24. Ole Miss had a chance at the end. Lane Kiffin and the guys just could not get it done. And I cannot believe how many people right now are harping on Bryce Young. I really can't. Mostly Alabama fans. But if Bryce Young is not playing for Alabama this year, that team loses 5 football games. Instead of sitting here and being 8-2, simply 8-2, 10 football games, you'd be 5-5. And I tweeted this out. It's crazy that Alabama is one play away in 2 football games from being undefeated, but they're also one play away in 3 football games, other than the ones that they've already lost to being a 5-5 football team. They really are. They're that close. That close. So, without Bryce Young, you better be pretty happy that he's stuck around. And, well, I guess he didn't have a choice, but that he's sticking around. Because, again, without him, don't think you're anything. Don't think you're anything. And all you can hope for next year is that you get wide receivers in there to be able to catch the football. If Bryce is there, I don't even know if he's a junior or senior. I don't know exactly what he is. And don't harp on Nick Saban, my goodness. I mean, I don't care for it, but guess what? You cannot deny that as of this era, he is the best college football coach there is. That's all there is to it. You and I can't deny it. The dude has proved it year in and year out. Until you can come in here and all of a sudden look at 2 hands and see rings on almost every finger of those 2 hands, you don't get to make that same argument. Now I hope Kirby's starting something like that up. Trust me, I'm fired up about it. And if you've ever watched The Office, I'll butcher the quote, but this is it. You know, back when Andy at the end of the season or at the end of the entire show says, "Man, I wish I knew I was living in the good old days when I was actually living in them." I'm telling you right now, Georgia fans, you're living in the good old days, so enjoy them. I'm telling you right now. Since 2017, you went to a national championship under Kirby Smart. You're one play away from having one championship right there. The 18th season, you're back in the SEC championship game again. Fall, heartbreaking, sucked. 2019, you're in the SEC championship game again. You fall to an unprecedented offense in LSU. Unprecedented. Who went on to win the national championship. 2019, COVID year, strange all around. Florida all of a sudden gets the better of you. So be it. 2021, that's your year. You go on, you win the national championship. 2022, we are working on back-to-back undefeated seasons. No, knock on wood, because we got 2 weeks left. And I just don't want to jinx anything. I don't know if I believe it or not, but I'm just going to say it. Well, it might be a little loud. I'm just going to say it because of that. Georgia is in the process of being undefeated regular season back-to-back seasons. Back-to-back. Awesome. Awesome to be able to watch it, enjoy it, be a part of it. Unprecedented. Enjoy it. You are in the good old days of Georgia football right now. So back to some of the other big games around the country. Clemson does get a win over Louisville. Thought this one might be a little closer. Still a pretty good football game, 31-16. UCLA falls to Arizona late, 34-28. It's another Pac-12 team down with another loss. North Carolina beats Wake Forest on the road, 36-34. Sneakily a 9-1 team there at 15. Boston College, here's a 3-7 team, doing something they shouldn't. At the time, by the way, 2-7, beating a 7-2 number 16 ranked NC State on the road, 21-20. UCF over Tulane, 38-31. Short-lived there, Tulane. Kansas State beats Baylor. Notre Dame struggled there with Navy, 35-32. Purdue upsets Illinois, 31-24. FSU is on a roll, 38-3, beating a team who was undefeated in the top 25 earlier in the season. Has fallen completely by the wayside in Syracuse. They're ranked in the top 25, suddenly 7-3. And then the big one, Vandy with the first SEC win in like 26 games. I don't remember what it is now. Finally getting the first SEC win since 2019. 2019. Beating Kentucky. By the way, 24 ranked to Kentucky in Lexington, 24-21. Congratulations, Vandy. Just glad to see it. Glad to see it for you. That's about all I can say to it, honestly. Hey, I tell you what, I'd love to see what you'd do in your rivalry game at the end of the season. That would be interesting. That would be pretty interesting at the end of the year. I'm just saying. I mean, I'm not just saying anything. I'm just saying how interesting something like that would be. But anyways, I've gone off the rails enough on this thing tonight. I'm going to wrap it up. Oh, yeah, I got to look at the weekly picks. Sorry, you guys. I almost went right out of here without showing you guys the weekly picks and how terrible I did this week. 3-3. 3-3. I took Georgia over Mississippi State, win. Took Tennessee over Missouri, win. Look at that, we're 2-0. But I had Mizzou plus 20 and a half. And at one point, I was like, hey, this looks good. Third quarter, I was like, hey, we're rocking on it. Got a nice 3-0 start. Didn't take the team of Alabama or Ole Miss because I figured, hey, I really don't know who's going to win this, but I felt like Ole Miss would keep it within 12. That's a win there. Then all of a sudden I'm looking and I'm going, okay, I got Georgia, Tennessee, and then I got Mississippi State, or Ole Miss, excuse me. That's 3 wins, and if Missouri would have kept it closer, all of a sudden I'm 4-0. But then TCU, Texas, completely crapped the bed on this one. Thought Texas was going to win it. Had them with the points there, and it just did not happen. Ends up putting me 3-3 on the week. That pushes me to 41, 32, and 2 on the season. So not the best, but in the end, doesn't matter because we're just having a good time with it anyways. So is what it is. But I do want to say I appreciate you guys listening yet again. I look forward to checking in with you guys a little bit later on this week. I know this episode at least, is coming to you just a little bit later than what it normally would. But we're going to preview Kentucky later on this week, and I invite you guys to make sure you guys come back on Friday and check that episode out. Other than that, we'll check in with you when that time comes. Go Dawgs.